Hello and welcome to Diabetes Connections in the News. I'm Stacey Sims, and these are the top diabetes stories and headlines of the past 7 days. We go live on social media first, and then all sources are linked up at diabetes-connections.com when this airs in a couple of days as a podcast. The news is brought to you by the world's worst diabetes mom, real life stories of parenting a child with type 1 diabetes, winner of Best New Nonfiction at the American Book Fest, and named a Book Authority Best Parenting Book. Available in paperback, ebook, or audiobook at Amazon. Our top story this week, a lot of you were asking about help for people with diabetes in Ukraine. I didn't jump right into this last week. I get very concerned about scams. So we hate to think about anything with diabetes that isn't on the up and up, but we do need to be careful. I was really glad to see Insulin for Life, which is very well known and well run, stepping in here. An easy way to donate to them is through Spare a Rose for Ukraine. This is the annual campaign centered around Valentine's Day that usually runs through February. They're extending it through March. All donations go to Insulin for Life, a registered charity with over 2 decades of experience providing insulin and diabetes supplies to under-resourced countries and responding to emergencies. They have an international consortium and network in Europe with partners in Ukraine and neighboring countries, and they have supplies ready to go if, when, and where needed. As doctors learn more about people who develop COVID-related diabetes, they're finding blood sugar returns to normal a few months later in some. Researchers studied 600 patients who showed signs of diabetes while hospitalized for COVID-19. 78 of those had no previous diagnosis of diabetes. Compared to patients with pre-existing diabetes, many of the newly diagnosed patients had less severe blood sugar issues, but more serious COVID-19. And then, roughly a year after leaving the hospital, 40% of the newly diagnosed patients had gone back to blood sugar levels considered to be non diabetic. Scotland has nearly 2 million people in a huge ongoing COVID study. The latest info from that shows no association with a COVID infection causing type 1 diabetes in children less than 16 years old. That is the wrong graphic. Type 1 in children increased to about, let me start that over again. My goodness. Type 1 in children increased to about 1.2 times the average during the pandemic, but it doesn't seem to have been caused by COVID. The US CDC has said otherwise, that there does seem to be a causal link between COVID and type 1. In all the studies so far, getting a COVID vaccine was not associated with the incidence of type 1. There is good news about using the Dexcom Cgm in the hospital. The FDA has granted breakthrough device designation for Dexcom for healthcare professionals to monitor and manage glucose levels in adults who use insulin while in the hospital. We first talked about this in 2020 when the FDA temporarily allowed hospital CGM use because of COVID. Dexcom created a special page on their website to provide resources to clinicians, and I will link that up. Researchers say they are making progress into amyloid, a key molecule in the pancreas that contributes to type 2. This is where this graphic is supposed to go. For the first time, scientists say they've uncovered the step-by-step changes that take place in a molecule known as human islet amyloid polypeptide. It's helpful in the body until it changes into a more damaging form. The researchers said their findings raise the possibility of new treatments for type 2 and other amyloid-related diseases, such as Alzheimer's. There is a huge psychological barrier against starting insulin for those with type 2. A new web-based resource is hoping to help with that. 1 in 4 adults with type 2 report being unwilling to start insulin once it's recommended. These Australian researchers designed an online resource called Is Insulin Right for Me? And they went through 8 psychological barriers like, does insulin mean my diabetes is more serious? Then they went through the educational process around each. This was a very small study, fewer than 40 people, but the response was positive enough to continue toward a broader rollout. Editorial here. I speak to people all the time who feel like starting insulin is a failure of willpower. I mean, I get it. We should all eat better and exercise more. But nobody feels the same shame about having to take blood pressure medication. So I'm really glad to see this getting attention. Okay, the price of insulin came up in the State of the Union speech this week. President Biden talking about lowering prescription drugs, capping the price of insulin for the insured, and he singled out 7th grader Joshua Davis from Virginia. He was diagnosed with type 1 when he was 11 months old. Joshua's father also lives with type 1. They were guests of the First Lady during the State of the Union. It's not clear if any of the measures to lower prescription drugs will actually get through Congress. And we are keeping up on the non invasive glucose monitoring news. The latest contender is sort of an old one. My Sugar Watch is said to be moving forward, could be available this year. The watch is a licensee of the Beat sensor, shown here, also known as SugarBeat, from Nemura Medical. The SugarBeat CGM has been around for a while. It got its CE mark, that's European approval, in 2019. It's a small patch that sticks onto your skin for 24 hours. Then you replace it. There's a Bluetooth app, on your smartphone. They submitted to the FDA in early 2020 with what looks like an updated submission last year. There are no needles here. There's also no word on a timeline or US rollout. If you've got a high school senior with type 1, you may want to check out Diabetes Scholars. Applications are open now. There is one application to be considered for any and all of the scholarships, and it closes March 27th. You must be a high school senior with type 1 seeking a higher education at an accredited 2 or 4-year university, college, technical, or trade school in the U.S., and you must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Our long format podcast episode this week is all about Eversense. We take a deep dive into the implanted CGM system. The FDA just approved the E3, which lasts 180 days, 6 months with no sensor changes. And next week, the real story behind the characters with diabetes in Pixar's Turning Red. And quick note about that episode, we usually drop the long format interview episodes Tuesday. This one is going to come out Sunday evening. If you follow or subscribe to the podcast on an app, it will still be delivered to you as usual. If you want to do anything different, I'll be posting on social media. You should be seeing it, no problem. But just a quick note, this one's coming out early. Please listen wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please share it. And that is In the News for this week.